Amara Rodriguez wiped down another table at the prestigious Willowbrook Country Club, her movements precise despite the exhaustion weighing on her shoulders. The morning had already brought 3 wedding receptions, each more demanding than the last, but nothing could have prepared her for what was about to unfold. In less than an hour, she would stand accused of theft in front of 200 wedding guests, her reputation hanging by a thread, while the one person who knew the truth remained silent. What she didn't know was that this moment of humiliation would become the catalyst for the most unexpected opportunity of her life. Before we carry on, please hit the subscribe button to make my day and let me know where you are watching from in the comments. The October sun cast golden streaks through the floor to ceiling windows of the Willowbrook Country Club's grand ballroom, illuminating crystal chandeliers that had witnessed countless celebrations over the past 3 decades. Amara Rodriguez adjusted her black uniform vest and tucked a strand of dark hair behind her ear as she surveyed the room one final time. Every detail had to be perfect for the Morrison-Blake wedding, scheduled to begin in 30 minutes. At 26, Amara had been working at Willowbrook for nearly 4 years, steadily climbing from busser to head waitress through sheer determination and an unwavering commitment to excellence. The job paid well enough to support her younger brother's college tuition and her grandmother's medical expenses, but more importantly, it had taught her that grace under pressure could open doors she'd never imagined. The bride, Victoria Blake, swept into the bridal suite like a force of nature, her $5,000 gown trailing behind her as she barked orders at anyone within earshot. Victoria came from old money, the kind that built wings of hospitals and had streets named after family patriarchs. Her wedding to Marcus Morrison had been the social event everyone in their circle had been anticipating for months. Marcus Morrison presented a stark contrast to his bride's theatrical energy. At 32, he possessed the quiet confidence that came from building his own empire rather than inheriting one. His luxury event planning company, Elite Occasions, had transformed from a modest startup 5 years ago into the premier choice for high-profile celebrations across the tri-state area. While Victoria commanded attention through volume and spectacle, Marcus observed the world with thoughtful eyes that seemed to catalog every detail. Amara had noticed him during the rehearsal dinner the evening before, not because of his obvious wealth or striking appearance, but because of the way he treated the staff. While other guests barely acknowledged their existence, Marcus had learned names, asked about families, and ensured everyone received generous tips. It was a kindness that hadn't gone unnoticed by the service team. Now, as the ceremony approached, Amara coordinated with her team of 12 servers to ensure every glass sparkled and every napkin lay perfectly folded. The reception menu featured locally sourced ingredients prepared by Chef Laurent, whose reputation had drawn food critics from 3 major newspapers. Everything had been planned to perfection, down to the precisely timed release of white doves during the couple's first kiss. Victoria's voice echoed from the bridal suite, growing increasingly shrill as she directed her army of bridesmaids, photographers, and stylists. The flowers need to be moved 6 inches to the left. No, not there. Exactly 6 inches. And someone needs to tell that photographer that I don't want any shots from my right side, only my left. I've been very clear about this. Through the chaos, Amara caught glimpses of Marcus in the groom's preparation area, straightening his tie with the help of his best man, David Chen, who had been his college roommate and business partner. Unlike the frantic energy emanating from the bridal party, the men's preparation proceeded with calm efficiency. The ceremony was scheduled for 3 o'clock, followed immediately by cocktail hour on the terrace, then dinner and dancing until 11. Amara had overseen dozens of similar events, but something about this particular wedding felt different. Perhaps it was the tension she sensed beneath Victoria's perfectly orchestrated enthusiasm, or the way Marcus seemed to be going through the motions rather than celebrating the happiest day of his life. As 2:30 approached, Amara made her final rounds, checking that the outdoor ceremony space remained pristine despite a light breeze that threatened to disturb the elaborate floral arrangements. White roses and baby's breath created a romantic canopy over the altar, while rows of gold chairs awaited the 200 guests who represented the cream of local society. The string quartet took their positions, their instruments gleaming in the afternoon sunlight. Amara recognized the violinist, Elena Vasquez, whose children attended the same elementary school where Amara volunteered on weekends. They exchanged a brief nod of acknowledgement as Elena tuned her instrument. Inside the country club, guests began arriving in luxury vehicles that formed an impressive parade along the circular drive. Women emerged in designer gowns and elaborate hats, while men adjusted silk ties and checked expensive watches. Amara and her team circulated with champagne flutes and hors d'oeuvres, their movements choreographed to appear effortless, despite the complexity of serving so many people simultaneously. Victoria's mother, Eleanor Blake, held court near the champagne fountain, regaling anyone within earshot with details about the wedding's cost and complexity. "The dress alone was imported from Milan," she announced to a circle of admirers. "And the flowers were flown in from Ecuador this morning. Nothing was too good for our Victoria." Meanwhile, Marcus's parents, Robert and Linda Morrison, mingled more quietly among the guests. His father, a retired high school principal, seemed slightly overwhelmed by the opulence, while his mother chatted warmly with anyone who approached. The contrast between the two families was subtle but unmistakable, reflecting different approaches to wealth and celebration. As the ceremony time approached, Amara noticed increasing activity around the groom's preparation area. Raised voices carried through the closed door, though she couldn't make out specific words. David emerged, looking concerned, scanning the room as if searching for something or someone. "Excuse me." He approached Amara, his voice tight with barely controlled anxiety. "Have you seen a small velvet box anywhere? Dark blue, about the size of a ring box?" Amara shook her head, immediately understanding the implications. "I'll ask my team to keep an eye out. When was it last seen?" "Marcus had it 20 minutes ago. We've torn the room apart." David ran his hands through his carefully styled hair, destroying hours of preparation. "The ceremony starts in 15 minutes. Word of the missing ring spread quickly among the staff, and within minutes, a discreet search was underway. Servers checked under tables and behind curtains, while kitchen staff examined every surface the wedding party might have visited. Amara coordinated a search while maintaining the appearance of normal pre-ceremony activity, not wanting to alarm the guests. The string quartet began playing the prelude music, signaling that the ceremony would begin momentarily. Still, no ring had been found. Amara watched as David disappeared back into the groom's room, presumably to deliver the bad news to Marcus. Through the window, she could see Victoria posing for final photographs in the garden, unaware of the crisis developing inside. Her elaborate veil caught the breeze like gossamer wings, creating ethereal images that would grace society pages for months to come. The photographer, a renowned artist whose work had appeared in luxury wedding magazines, captured every angle with professional precision. The missing ring represented more than just a piece of jewelry. It was a family heirloom, passed down through 3 generations of Morrison men, each of whom had worn it during their own wedding ceremonies. Marcus had mentioned its significance during the rehearsal dinner, describing how his grandfather had worked extra shifts at the steel mill to afford it in 1942. As the ceremony start time passed, murmurs began circulating among the guests. The string quartet repeated their prelude selection, buying precious minutes while the crisis unfolded behind the scenes. Amara noticed several guests checking their phones and whispering among themselves, their patience beginning to wear thin despite the elegant surroundings. Eleanor Blake marched toward the entrance, her feathered hat quivering with indignation. "What is the meaning of this delay?" she demanded of anyone within earshot. "We have a very precise schedule to maintain." Before anyone could respond, the groom's room door burst open, and Victoria emerged like a hurricane in white silk. Her perfect makeup couldn't disguise the fury blazing in her eyes as she searched the gathering crowd. "Someone has stolen my fiancée Atilda Copyright S wedding ring," she announced, her voice carrying across the ballroom and drawing every guest's attention. The accusation hung in the air like a toxic cloud, transforming the celebration's atmosphere into something cold and suspicious. Guests who had been chatting amicably moments before now eyed each other with uncertainty, while the staff froze in their positions like deer caught in headlights. "I want everyone searched," Victoria continued, her voice rising with each word. "No one leaves this building until that ring is found. It's worth more than most people make in a year, and I will not have my wedding ruined by some common thief." Marcus appeared behind his bride, his face pale but composed. "Victoria, perhaps we should handle this more discreetly. I'm sure there's a reasonable explanation." "Reasonable explanation?" Victoria spun to face him, her veil swirling dramatically. "Your family's precious heirloom doesn't just disappear into thin air, Marcus. Someone took it, and I intend to find out who." Amara felt the weight of 200 pairs of eyes, as suspicion settled over the staff like a suffocating blanket. She had experienced prejudice before, subtle looks and assumptions based on her appearance and position, but never had she faced such public accusation. Her hands trembled slightly as she maintained her professional composure, knowing that any sign of guilt or defensiveness would only fuel the fire. Victoria's gaze swept across the service staff with predatory intensity before settling on Amara. "You," she pointed with a perfectly manicured finger. "You were in charge of the room setup. You had access to everywhere the ring could have been." "Mrs. Blake." Amara's voice remained steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. "I understand your concern, but I can assure you that neither I nor any of my staff has seen or touched any ring belonging to Mr. Morrison." "Assure me?" Victoria's laugh carried no humor. "Do you think your assurances mean anything to me? I want you and your entire staff searched immediately. This wedding cost $200,000, and I will not have it ruined by petty theft." The country club manager, Harold Winters, appeared at Amara's side, his loyalty clearly torn between protecting his staff and maintaining client relationships. Harold had been at Willowbrook for 15 years and had witnessed Amara's dedication and integrity countless times, but Victoria Blake represented exactly the kind of client who could destroy the club's reputation with a single negative review. "Perhaps we could conduct a discreet search," Harold suggested carefully. "I'm sure this is all a misunderstanding that can be resolved quickly." "Discreet?" Victoria's voice reached a pitch that made several guests visibly wince. "There's nothing discreet about theft, Mr. Winters. I want every pocket turned out, every bag opened, and every surface examined. And if that ring isn't found, I want the police called immediately." Marcus stepped forward, placing a gentle hand on his bride's arm. "Victoria, let's take a moment to think about this rationally. The ring could have fallen somewhere, or been misplaced during the preparation. Accusing the staff without evidence isn't the right approach." "Evidence? Evidence?" Victoria shook off his touch, her carefully applied makeup beginning to show signs of stress. "The evidence is that your precious ring is missing, and the only people who had access to it are the staff. How much more evidence do you need?" Amara watched Marcus's face carefully, noting the conflict playing out behind his eyes. There was something in his expression that didn't match the situation, a guilt that seemed deeper than simple concern over a misplaced ring. She filed the observation away, as Victoria continued her tirade. "I want to speak to the owner of this establishment," Victoria declared. "If your staff cannot be trusted with valuable items, then perhaps Willowbrook shouldn't be hosting events of this caliber. My family has connections throughout the hospitality industry, and word travels fast about establishments that can't guarantee their clients' security." End quote. The threat was clear and potent. Willowbrook Country Club depended on its reputation among the wealthy elite, and a scandal involving theft could destroy decades of careful relationship building. Harold's face had gone ashen as he calculated the potential damage to the club's standing. Eleanor Blake joined her daughter, adding her voice to the accusations. "In my day, the help knew their place and respected their employer's property. This is exactly why I told you we should have hired those servers from the city, Victoria. At least they would have been properly vetted." The classist undertones of the comments stung more than the direct accusations. Amara had grown up in a working-class family, where respect was earned through character rather than bank accounts, and she had never forgotten those values, despite her current professional environment. She maintained her dignity, while internally cataloging every insult for future motivation. David Chen emerged from another frantic search of the groom's preparation area, shaking his head to indicate continued failure. "We've checked every surface 3 times, he reported quietly to Marcus. "It's not there." "Then it's not misplaced," Victoria seized on this information triumphantly. "It was stolen, exactly as I said. Mr. Winters, I want the police called now, and I want every member of your staff detained until they arrive." The word, detained, sent a chill through the assembled staff members, several of whom began exchanging worried glances. Many of them were immigrants or first-generation Americans who had learned to fear any interaction with law enforcement, regardless of their innocence. Amara felt the responsibility of leadership weighing heavily on her shoulders as she realized her team was looking to her for guidance in this unprecedented situation. "Mrs. Blake." Amara stepped forward, her voice carrying the authority she had developed through years of managing difficult situations. "I understand your frustration, but accusing innocent people won't solve this problem. My team and I have dedicated ourselves to making your day perfect, and we would never do anything to jeopardize that commitment." "Mon, your commitment?" Victoria's eyes blazed with indignation. "Your commitment is to serve drinks and clear plates, not to lecture me about problem solving. You're a waitress, nothing more, and you'll remember your place or find yourself looking for a new job." The dismissive tone ignited something fierce in Amara's chest, but she channeled the anger into resolve rather than confrontation. She had dealt with entitled clients before, but none had been quite so publicly vicious in their attacks on her character and dignity. Marcus watched the exchange with growing discomfort, his jaw tightening each time Victoria launched another verbal assault. Several times he seemed on the verge of speaking, only to catch himself and remain silent. The internal struggle was visible to anyone paying attention, though most guests were too caught up in the drama to notice such subtle details. Harold Winters found himself caught between competing loyalties and business interests. Firing Amara would satisfy Victoria's demands and potentially save the club's reputation, but it would also mean losing his most competent staff member over an unproven accusation. The decision could define his career and the club's future direction. "I'm calling the police," Victoria announced, pulling out her diamond-encrusted phone. "This has gone on long enough. I refuse to start my marriage under a cloud of theft and suspicion." "Victoria, wait." Marcus finally found his voice, though it carried a strange quality that Amara couldn't quite identify. "Maybe we should consider postponing the ceremony until this gets sorted out. It wouldn't be right to celebrate while there are unresolved issues." "Postpone?" Victoria whirled on him as if he had suggested canceling Christmas. "Are you out of your mind, Marcus? We have 200 guests here, a $10,000 photographer, and catering that cost more than some people's cars. We are not postponing anything." "But the ring," Marcus pressed, and Amara noticed sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool October air. "It was my grandfather's. We can't have the ceremony without it." "Then we'll use a different ring for now and find yours later," Victoria declared with the casual dismissiveness of someone accustomed to solving problems with money. "My jeweler can have a replacement made by tomorrow if necessary." The suggestion clearly horrified Marcus, who shook his head emphatically. "That ring has been in my family for 80 years. It can't just be replaced with something from a jewelry store." "Then maybe you should have been more careful with it," Victoria snapped, her patience clearly exhausted. "But I will not have my perfect wedding ruined because you were careless with jewelry." The cruel comment hung in the air like a toxic cloud, revealing depths to Victoria's character that had perhaps been hidden during their courtship. Several guests shifted uncomfortably, while others leaned in closer to catch every word of what had become the most dramatic wedding ceremony in Willowbrook's history. Amara found herself studying Marcus more intently, noting the way he flinched at his bride's harsh words. There was pain in his expression that went beyond concern over a missing ring, a hurt that spoke to deeper issues in their relationship. She wondered how many similar scenes had played out in private, away from the watching eyes of family and friends. Elena Vasquez, the violinist, caught Amara's attention with a subtle gesture toward the terrace doors. Several other staff members were discreetly positioning themselves near exits, clearly uncomfortable with the escalating tension and uncertain about their legal standing if police became involved. "Nobody leaves," Victoria commanded, as if reading their thoughts. "Mr. Winters, I want your security to monitor all entrances and exits until this matter is resolved. Anyone who tries to leave will be considered a suspect." Harold nodded reluctantly to the head of security, a former police officer named Robert Thorne, who had been working at the club for 6 years. Robert's expression suggested he was no happier about the situation than anyone else, but he began positioning his small team as requested. The grandfather clock in the corner chimed 4 o'clock, marking a full hour past the scheduled ceremony start time. Several guests began checking their phones more frequently, and a few couples near the back of the room engaged in whispered conversations about whether they should leave. Eleanor Blake took charge of guest relations, circulating among the crowd with explanations that placed all blame squarely on the staff's shoulders. "It's such a shame," she confided to anyone willing to listen. "You simply cannot trust the help these days. In my generation, people had more respect for their betters." Meanwhile, Marcus's parents stood apart from the main group, clearly uncomfortable with the public nature of the accusations. Linda Morrison approached Harold Winters with a concerned expression. "Surely, there's been some mistake," she said quietly. "We've been coming to Willowbrook for years, and the staff has always been exemplary." "I appreciate your confidence, Mrs. Morrison," Harold replied carefully. "We're doing everything we can to resolve this situation quickly and fairly." Victoria overheard the conversation and inserted herself with characteristic force. "Fairly?" she demanded. "What's fair about having my wedding disrupted by theft? What's fair about being forced to suspect every person who's supposed to be helping make our day special?" "I understand your frustration," Linda Morrison replied, with the patience of someone accustomed to dealing with difficult people. "But rushing to judgment without all the facts could lead to greater problems down the road." "Greater problems?" Victoria's voice reached new heights of indignation. What could be a greater problem than having thieves working at supposedly reputable establishment? This is exactly why the country is falling apart, because people make excuses for criminal behavior instead of holding people accountable. The political undertones of her rant made several guests visibly uncomfortable, particularly those who recognized the dangerous territory being entered when accusations of theft became entangled with broader social prejudices. Amara felt the weight of St. representing not just herself, but everyone who looked like her or shared her background. Marcus seemed to shrink further into himself with each of Victoria's pronouncements, his discomfort growing more apparent by the minute. Several times he opened his mouth as if to speak, then closed it again without saying anything. The internal battle playing out on his face became increasingly difficult to ignore. David Chen pulled Marcus aside for a private conversation near the terrace doors. Their heads bent together in urgent discussion. Amara couldn't hear their words, but their body language suggested disagreement about how to handle the situation. After several minutes, David approached Harold Winters with a proposal. "What if we offered to cover the cost of the ring? It would eliminate any need for police involvement and allow the ceremony to proceed." Harold's relief was visible as he considered this diplomatic solution, but Victoria rejected it before he could respond. "Absolutely not," she declared. "Money can't replace a family heirloom, and accepting payment would be admitting that your staff is guilty. I want the actual ring returned and the thief identified." "But Mrs. Blake," David pressed, "if the goal is to proceed with your ceremony, this would solve the immediate problem while still allowing for a continued search." "The goal," Victoria replied with icy precision, "is to have my wedding ring on my husband's finger when we exchange vows. Nothing else is acceptable." Her intransigence left no room for compromise, effectively trapping everyone in the escalating confrontation. The guests grew increasingly restless as the delay stretched toward the 2-hour mark, with several families beginning to gather their belongings despite Victoria's earlier prohibition on leaving. Robert Thorne, the head of security, approached Harold with an update on their search efforts. "We've examined every public area and storage space," he reported quietly. "The ring isn't anywhere accessible to the general staff." This information should have exonerated Amara and her team, but Victoria dismissed it immediately. Then they hid it somewhere else, or passed it to an accomplice outside the building. "Thieves aren't stupid, Mr. Thorne. They know how to cover their tracks." The accusation of an organized theft conspiracy struck everyone as increasingly absurd, but Victoria's conviction never wavered. She had constructed a narrative that painted the staff as criminal masterminds rather than considering more mundane explanations for the ring's disappearance. Amara watched Marcus throughout these exchanges, noting how his distress seemed to intensify with each new accusation hurled at the staff. There was something in his demeanor that suggested knowledge he wasn't sharing, a weight of secrets that went beyond simple concern for a missing heirloom. As the afternoon wore on, The beautiful October weather that had promised to make the outdoor ceremony perfect began to change. Clouds gathered on the horizon, and a cool breeze rustled through the elaborate floral arrangements that had cost thousands of dollars to create. The string quartet packed up their instruments after playing the same repertoire multiple times, their fees for the day having been thoroughly earned despite the lack of an actual ceremony. Elena Vasquez gave Amara a supportive nod as she left, a small gesture of solidarity that provided some comfort in the sea of suspicion. Several guests approached Harold Winters to express their intention to leave, citing other commitments and the impossibility of rescheduling their evening plans. Each departure felt like a small victory to Amara, reducing the number of witnesses to her public humiliation. Eleanor Blake took these departures as personal insults, addressing each leaving guest with guilt-laden farewells designed to make them reconsider. "I hope you'll remember this experience when choosing venues for your own events," she said meaningfully to one departing couple. By 5 o'clock, nearly half the guests had left despite Victoria's protests. Those who remained seemed motivated more by curiosity about the drama's resolution than genuine interest in witnessing a wedding ceremony. The celebration had transformed into a spectacle of dysfunction that would fuel gossip for months to come. Marcus finally broke away from his handlers and approached Amara directly, his face etched with an anguish that seemed disproportionate to the situation. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, the words carrying layers of meaning that confused her. "You don't deserve any of this." "Mr. Morrison," Amara replied carefully, aware that their conversation was being observed by multiple parties. "I appreciate your concern, but the truth has a way of revealing itself. I'm confident this situation will be resolved fairly." Her quiet dignity, in the face of public accusations, seemed to affect him deeply, and for a moment she thought he might say something more. Instead, he turned away abruptly and rejoined the group surrounding Victoria. Harold Winters approached Amara with the resigned expression of a man facing an impossible choice. "Amara, I think it might be best if you took some time off while we sort this out," he said quietly. "It's not about guilt or innocence. It's about managing the situation." The suggestion felt like a knife twist, implying that her mere presence was problematic, regardless of her actual involvement in any wrongdoing. She had given 4 years of her life to Willowbrook, building relationships and establishing herself as an indispensable part of their operation, only to be cast aside at the first sign of controversy. "Harold," she replied, using his first name for perhaps the first time in their professional relationship, "you know me better than this. In 4 years, have I ever given you reason to doubt my integrity? His pained expression revealed the conflict between his personal knowledge of her character and the business pressures he faced. "It's not about what I know, Amara. It's about what I can prove to people who don't know you the way I do." The response encapsulated everything wrong with a system that valued perception over truth, relationships over justice. Amara nodded slowly, understanding that her position at Willowbrook had become untenable regardless of her innocence. "I'll clean out my locker," she said simply, refusing to give Victoria the satisfaction of seeing her break down under pressure. As she walked toward the staff area, she caught Marcus watching her with an expression of profound guilt and regret. Their eyes met for a brief moment, and she saw something there that made her pause, a knowledge that seemed to weigh on him like a physical burden. The staff locker room felt like a sanctuary after hours of public scrutiny and accusations. Amara sat on the bench where she had changed into her uniform that morning when her biggest concern was ensuring perfect service for another successful event. The contrast between her morning expectations and evening reality felt surreal. Her phone buzzed with a text from her brother Carlos, asking about her day. She stared at the message, unsure how to explain that her career had been destroyed by accusations of theft she couldn't disprove. The scholarship money for his engineering program came partially from her income, and losing her job would affect more than just her own future. Other staff members stopped by to offer support and express their outrage at the unfair treatment she had received. Maria Santos, who had worked in the kitchen for 8 years, was particularly vocal in her anger. "That woman is poison," she declared. "Everyone knows you wouldn't steal a penny from anyone." The support meant more than they could know, but it couldn't change the reality of her situation. Victoria Blake's accusations had poisoned the well, making it impossible for Amara to continue working at Willowbrook without constant suspicion and scrutiny. As she packed her few personal belongings, Amara reflected on the day's events and the way they revealed uncomfortable truths about power, privilege, and justice. She had always known that people in her position were vulnerable to accusations they couldn't defend against, but experiencing it firsthand was profoundly different from understanding it intellectually. The sound of raised voices from the main ballroom indicated that the drama was continuing even in her absence. Through the thin walls, she could hear Victoria berating someone new, probably another staff member who had fallen under suspicion. Harold appeared in the doorway, his expression a mixture of guilt and resignation. "I'm sorry it came to this, Amara. You know I don't believe you took anything, but Mrs. Blake is threatening to sue the club and destroy our reputation if we don't take action." "I understand the position you're in," Amara replied, though understanding didn't make the situation less painful. "I won't make it harder for you by fighting this." Her grace in defeat seemed to make Harold feel worse rather than better about his decision. "I'll provide you with excellent references," he offered. "Any establishment would be lucky to have someone with your skills and character." The promise felt hollow, given the circumstances of her departure, but she nodded acceptance anyway. Fighting would only prolong the agony, and potentially make it harder for her former colleagues, who would have to continue working under Victoria's cloud of suspicion. As the sun set over Willowbrook Country Club, Amara walked to her car through the staff parking area, avoiding the main entrance where remaining guests might see her departure as an admission of guilt. The October evening had turned cool, and she pulled her jacket closer as she reflected on the day that had changed everything. Her phone rang as she reached her car, displaying her grandmother's number. Maria Eleanor Rodriguez had immigrated from Mexico in the 1960s and built a life through hard work and dignity, values she had passed down to her granddaughter. Explaining today's events would require courage Amara wasn't sure she possessed. Instead of answering, she sat in her car and watched through the rear window as the last guest departed from what should have been a fairy tale wedding. The elaborate decorations that had taken days to arrange would be dismantled by morning, leaving no trace of the celebration that never happened. The irony wasn't lost on her that Victoria Blake's pursuit of perfection had destroyed the very event she was trying to protect. In her determination to find someone to blame for the missing ring, she had turned her wedding day into a public spectacle of accusations and conflict. Marcus appeared in the main entrance, no longer wearing his tuxedo jacket and looking haggard in the artificial lighting. He stood alone for several minutes, staring out at the empty parking lot, as if processing the day's events. Even from a distance, Amara could see the weight of whatever burden he was carrying. Their eyes met across the parking lot, and she saw him take a step in her direction before stopping himself. The gesture revealed internal conflict, but provided no answers to the questions swirling in her mind about his role in the day's events. Victoria emerged behind him, still in her wedding gown but with her veil removed and her makeup showing signs of the emotional stress she had endured. She took Marcus's arm possessively, as if claiming ownership of him in the same way she had tried to control every other aspect of her wedding day. Amara started her car and drove away from Willowbrook, leaving behind 4 years of professional growth and personal relationships. In her rearview mirror, she could see Marcus and Victoria standing together in the entrance, two figures bound by circumstances that had revealed more about their characters than any wedding ceremony could have. The drive home took her through neighborhoods that represented different levels of economic prosperity, from the exclusive enclave surrounding Willowbrook to the working-class community where she had grown up. The contrast reminded her of the social barriers that Victoria Blake had used as weapons in her accusations. Her apartment was a modest one-bedroom space that she had furnished carefully with pieces chosen for both functionality and beauty. It reflected her values of making the best of whatever circumstances life provided, finding dignity and comfort without requiring luxury or excess. She changed out of her uniform for what might be the last time, folding it carefully despite the day's associations. The black vest and crisp white shirt had been symbols of professional pride, representing her advancement from her humble beginnings to a position of responsibility and respect. The evening news was dominated by political scandals and economic uncertainty, providing perspective on her personal crisis while failing to diminish its impact on her immediate future. She turned off the television and sat in the silence of her apartment, processing the rapid transformation of her life. Around 9 o'clock, her phone rang with an unknown number. She almost ignored it, assuming it was another telemarketer, but something made her answer on the fourth ring. "Hello, Amara? This is Marcus Morrison." The sound of his voice sent a jolt of surprise through her system. After the day's events, she had never expected to hear from him directly, certainly not calling her personal phone number. "Mr. Morrison," she replied carefully, unsure of his intentions or her own safety in speaking with him. "How did you get my number?" "Harold gave it to me. I know this is unusual, but I need to speak with you. Could you meet me somewhere private? There are things you need to know about what happened today." And the request was both intriguing and potentially dangerous. Meeting alone with a man whose bride had publicly accused her of theft could be seen as suspicious or inappropriate, but his tone suggested urgency that went beyond social conventions. "I'm not sure that's wise," she replied. "Given the circumstances, please." His voice carried a desperation that seemed genuine. "What happened today wasn't your fault, and you deserve to know the truth. I can't live with letting you take the blame for something you didn't do." The words implied knowledge he hadn't shared during the day's confrontations, confirming her intuition that there was more to the story than missing jewelry. Against her better judgment, curiosity and a desire for answers overcame her caution. "Where did you have in mind?" she asked. "There's a coffee shop called Bean there, about 10 minutes from your apartment. It's quiet and neutral territory. I can be there in 20 minutes if that works for you." The fact that he knew the location of her apartment was slightly unsettling, but she recognized the coffee shop as a public place where she would be safe from any potential harm. More importantly, the possibility of finally learning the truth about the day's events was too compelling to ignore. "I'll be there," she agreed. Being there occupied the ground floor of a converted Victorian house, its warm lighting and mismatched furniture creating an atmosphere that encouraged intimate conversations. At 9:30 on a Saturday evening, it held only a handful of customers, mostly college students studying for exams or couples enjoying quiet dates. Marcus was already seated in the corner booth when she arrived, his appearance dramatically different from the polished groom she had seen that morning. His hair was disheveled, his tie was gone, and his white dress shirt was wrinkled and partially untucked. He looked like a man who had been through an emotional hurricane. "Thank you for coming," he said, as she approached the table, his voice heavy with exhaustion and what sounded like relief. "I wasn't sure you would. I almost didn't," she admitted, sliding into the seat across from him. "But I need to understand what happened today, and you seem to be the only person with answers." A waitress approached their table, and Marcus ordered 2 coffees without asking Amara's preference, then seemed to realize his presumption. "I'm sorry, I should have asked what you wanted." "Coffee is fine," she assured him, studying his face for clues about his mental state and intentions. "You said there were things I needed to know. What exactly did you mean?" Marcus took a deep breath, as if preparing for a confession that would change everything. "The ring isn't missing," he said quietly, the words hitting her like physical blows. "I know exactly where it is." The admission hung between them like a live wire, dangerous and shocking in its implications. Amara felt anger rising in her chest as she processed what he had just revealed. "You know where it is?" Her voice was barely above a whisper, but the fury behind it was unmistakable. "You let me be accused of theft, nearly fired, and publicly humiliated when you knew where your ring was the entire time?" "It's not that simple," Marcus began, but she cut him off with a gesture that would have silenced a charging bull. "Not that simple?" She leaned forward, her dark eyes blazing with righteous indignation. "I lost my job today because of your lie. My reputation has been destroyed, my livelihood threatened, and you're telling me it's not simple?" The waitress arrived with their coffee, immediately sensing the tension at the table and retreating quickly without her usual friendly chatter. The steaming cups sat untouched between them, as Marcus struggled to find words that could possibly explain his actions. "I threw it away," he said finally, the confession emerging like a physical wound. "Yesterday morning, before the rehearsal dinner." I couldn't go through with the wedding, but I didn't know how to stop it without destroying everything. So I got rid of the ring, thinking it would give me an excuse to postpone things. Amara stared at him in disbelief, her mind reeling as she tried to process the magnitude of his deception. You threw away an 80-year-old family heirloom rather than tell your fiancée Atilda copyright you were having second thoughts? I know how it sounds. Marcus ran his hands through his hair, a gesture she was beginning to recognize as his response to overwhelming stress. But you don't understand the pressure I've been under. Victoria's family has connections throughout the business community. If I humiliated her publicly, it could have destroyed my company and ruined dozens of people who depend on me for their livelihoods. So instead you decided to ruin mine, Amara replied coldly. That makes perfect sense. The sarcasm hit its mark, and Marcus flinched as if she had slapped him. I never intended for anyone to be blamed. I thought people would assume it was lost or misplaced, that we would search for a while and then postpone the ceremony. I never imagined Victoria would immediately assume theft. But when she did assume theft, when she pointed her finger directly at me, you said nothing. Amara's voice grew stronger with each word, fueled by the injustice of her situation. You watched me be accused, threatened, and fired, and you never once spoke up to defend me. I wanted to, Marcus insisted, leaning forward in his chair. A dozen times I almost told the truth, but the consequences seemed too enormous. Victoria's father has business relationships with half my clients. One word from him could blacklist elite occasions from every major event in the state. And that was more important than my reputation and livelihood? The question hung between them like an accusation, revealing the true priorities that had guided his decision-making. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, staring into his untouched coffee as if it might contain answers to questions he hadn't known how to ask. When he finally looked up, his eyes were filled with a shame that seemed to emanate from his core. No, he said simply. It wasn't more important. Nothing was more important than telling the truth and protecting an innocent person from false accusations. I failed in the most basic test of character, and I'm sorry. The apology, while sincere, couldn't undo the damage that had been done to her life and career. Amara felt the weight of unemployment, the stress of explaining the situation to her family, and the challenge of finding new work after being publicly accused of theft. Sorry doesn't pay my bills or restore my reputation, she said quietly. Sorry doesn't explain to my grandmother why I lost a job I loved, because someone else was too cowardly to face their own decisions. The harsh words clearly stung, but Marcus didn't defend himself or try to deflect responsibility. Instead, he nodded slowly, accepting her anger as justified and deserved. You're absolutely right, he agreed. I was a coward, and my cowardice hurt an innocent person who deserved better. The question now is what I can do to make this right. Make it right? Amara laughed bitterly. You can't unmake the accusations, Marcus. You can't give me back my job or erase the memory of being called a thief in front of 200 people. Some things can't be fixed with good intentions and delayed apologies. I know I can't undo what happened, Marcus replied, his voice gaining strength as he moved from confession toward action. But I can try to repair some of the damage. I can tell Harold Winters the truth and insist that you be reinstated with full back pay. I can provide you with references that will open doors at any establishment you choose to work for. And in return? Amara asked suspiciously, knowing that wealthy people rarely offered help without expecting something in return. Nothing, Marcus said firmly. This isn't a negotiation or an exchange. It's an attempt to do what I should have done hours ago, which is take responsibility for my actions and protect someone who was hurt by my decisions. The sincerity in his voice was compelling, but Amara had learned to be cautious about trusting people whose words hadn't matched their actions in the past. She studied his face, looking for signs of deception or hidden motives. Why now? She asked. What changed between this afternoon and tonight that suddenly made you willing to tell the truth? Marcus was quiet for several minutes, apparently wrestling with how much to reveal about his personal situation. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of someone who had been living with secrets for too long. The wedding was called off, he said quietly. About an hour after you left. Victoria's father showed up and made it clear that the Blake family would not tolerate any association with establishments that Brookall couldn't guarantee security. Harold was forced to refund their entire fee and cancel all future bookings they had scheduled. The revelation hit Amara like a physical blow. Victoria Blake's threats had been carried out even after her departure, destroying relationships and canceling contracts that represented months of future income for Willowbrook. "How many events did they cancel?" she asked. 7 weddings and 12 corporate functions over the next 6 months, Marcus replied. Probably close to $500,000 in lost revenue. The numbers were staggering, representing not just lost income, but potential staff layoffs and damage to the club's reputation that could take years to repair. Amara felt sick thinking about her former colleagues, who would suffer because of accusations that had been false from the beginning. "And you're telling me this because?" she prompted, though she was beginning to understand his motivations. "Because I realized that my cowardice didn't just hurt you," Marcus explained. "It hurt everyone who works at Willowbrook, everyone who depends on that place for their livelihoods. My selfish decision to avoid confrontation has caused damage that goes far beyond what I originally imagined." The scope of the consequences seemed to be dawning on him in real time, as if he hadn't fully considered the ripple effects of his actions until he was forced to articulate them aloud. "Victoria broke off the engagement about 2 hours ago," he continued. "She said she couldn't marry someone who was careless enough to lose a family heirloom, especially when that carelessness cost her the perfect wedding she had been planning for 2 years. There was irony in Victoria ending their relationship over the very lie Marcus had created to avoid marrying her, but Amara found little satisfaction in the poetic justice of the situation. Too many innocent people had been hurt for her to feel vindicated by his personal consequences. "So, now that your engagement is over and you have nothing left to lose, you've decided to tell the truth," she summarized. "How convenient for your conscience." "You have every right to be cynical about my motives," Marcus admitted. "But the truth is, I've been questioning this relationship for months. The ring incident was just the catalyst that forced me to confront what I'd been avoiding." "What kind of relationship problems?" Amara asked, curiosity overcoming her anger for a moment. Marcus hesitated, clearly uncomfortable discussing personal details, but seemed to recognize that he owed her honesty after the day's deceptions. "Victoria has a way of treating people, especially people she considers beneath her social status," he said carefully. "I've watched her be dismissive and cruel to waitstaff, cleaning crews, delivery drivers, anyone who serves her in some capacity. Today wasn't the first time she's made accusations against service personnel." The revelation painted a picture of systematic behavior, rather than an isolated incident of wedding day stress. Amara thought about the other staff members at Willowbrook and wondered how many of them had been subjected to Victoria's abuse over the years. "Why didn't you end things sooner if you were so uncomfortable with her behavior?" she asked. "Fear," Marcus answered simply. "Fear of the social consequences, fear of the business repercussions, fear of disappointing families who had been planning this union for months. I kept telling myself that maybe she would change, or that I could influence her to be kinder, but deep down, I knew I was just making excuses." "And today you finally saw who she really was?" Amara suggested. "Today, I saw who I really was," Marcus corrected. "I saw that I was willing to let an innocent person suffer rather than face my own problems honestly. That's not the kind of man I want to be, and it's certainly not the kind of man who deserves to run a company or lead employees." The self-reflection was more profound than Amara had expected from someone she had assumed was just another wealthy dilettante. There was genuine anguish in his voice as he confronted his own moral failings. "What happened to the ring?" she asked. "If you threw it away yesterday, where is it now?" Marcus looked embarrassed as he reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. "I couldn't actually go through with throwing away something that meant so much to my family," he admitted. "It's been in my pocket this entire time." The sight of the ring box sent a fresh wave of anger through Amara's system. The physical proof of his deception made the day's events feel even more surreal and unjust. "You had it with you while I was being accused of theft?" she asked incredulously. "While Victoria was threatening to have me arrested, and Harold was essentially firing me?" "Yes," Marcus said quietly, his shame evident in every syllable. I kept thinking I would find the right moment to discover it somewhere, to end the crisis without having to explain why it had gone missing in the first place. But there never was a right moment, was there? Amara observed. Because once the accusations started, any convenient discovery would have raised questions about how the ring got to wherever you found it. Marcus nodded, clearly recognizing the logical trap his deception had created. I painted myself into a corner and couldn't find a way out that didn't involve admitting what I had done. So you chose to let me suffer the consequences of your poor planning, Amara concluded. That's what leadership looks like to you? The question struck home with particular force, challenging not just his personal integrity, but his professional identity as someone who was supposed to guide and protect the people who worked for him. It's not leadership at all, Marcus acknowledged. It's the opposite of leadership. A real leader would have taken responsibility immediately, regardless of the personal cost. They sat in silence for several minutes, the weight of his admissions settling between them like a heavy blanket. The coffee shop around them continued its quiet Saturday evening business, unaware of the dramatic confession taking place in the corner booth. What do you want from me now? Amara finally asked. Forgiveness? Absolution? Permission to feel better about yourself? I want to make things right, Marcus replied. Or as right as they can be made given what's already happened. I want to restore your reputation, help you find an even better position than the one you lost, and ensure that the people at Willowbrook don't suffer from my mistakes. And how exactly do you plan to accomplish all of that? She asked skeptically. Victoria's family has already done their damage. Harold has already made his decision. The other staff members have already watched me be accused and dismissed. You can't just snap your fingers and undo all of that. I can start by calling Harold tonight and telling him the truth, Marcus said. I can insist that you be reinstated immediately with a formal apology and compensation for the distress you've endured. What if he refuses? Amara challenged. What if he decides that bringing me back would just create more drama and potential liability? Then I'll make it worth his while to do the right thing, Marcus replied grimly. Elite Occasions does a lot of business with Willowbrook, and we have contracts for several major events this year. I'll make it clear that our continued partnership depends on your reinstatement and fair treatment. The offer was generous, but Amara found herself questioning whether she even wanted to return to Willowbrook after everything that had happened. The workplace that had once felt like a second home now carried associations of humiliation and betrayal. Maybe I don't want to go back, she said quietly. Maybe some bridges have been burned beyond repair. Marcus studied her face, seeming to recognize the deeper implications of what she was saying. What would you want instead? The question opened possibilities that Amara hadn't allowed herself to consider during the crisis of the afternoon. For 4 years, she had focused on advancement within the Willowbrook system, but perhaps it was time to think more broadly about her career goals. I've always wanted to work in event planning rather than just service, she admitted. I've taken courses in hospitality management and event coordination, but I've never had the opportunity to use those skills professionally. What kind of events interest you most? Marcus asked, his tone shifting from apologetic to genuinely curious. Weddings, actually, Amara replied with a rueful smile. Despite today's disaster, I love the idea of helping couples create perfect celebrations of their love. There's something magical about bringing together all the elements that make a day unforgettable. Even after what you witnessed today? Marcus asked. Today wasn't about love, Amara observed. It was about ego, control, and social status. Real love doesn't need to destroy other people to prove its worth. The distinction clearly resonated with Marcus, who nodded slowly, as if she had articulated something he had been struggling to understand about his own relationship. Elite Occasions is always looking for talented people, he said carefully. If you're serious about event planning, I could offer you a position that would let you develop those skills while earning more than you were making at Willowbrook. The offer was unexpected and potentially life-changing, but Amara's first instinct was to view it with suspicion. After a day of deception and manipulation, grand gestures from wealthy men seemed inherently blurred. Suspect. Is this guilt talking or a genuine job offer? She asked bluntly. Both, Marcus admitted. I feel enormous guilt about what happened to you, and I want to make amends in whatever way I can. But I've also spent the last few hours thinking about the grace and professionalism you showed under incredible pressure. That's exactly the kind of character I want on my team. Character you tried to destroy when it became inconvenient for you, Amara pointed out. Character I failed to defend when it mattered most, Marcus corrected. Which is why I'm even more impressed that you maintained your dignity throughout the whole ordeal. You showed more integrity in one afternoon than I've shown in months of avoiding difficult conversations. The compliment was flattering, but Amara remained cautious about trusting someone whose actions had been so different from his words. Why should I believe this offer is genuine? She asked. How do I know you won't throw me under the bus again if it becomes convenient? You don't, Marcus replied honestly. You have no reason to trust me based on my behavior today. All I can offer is my word that I've learned from my mistakes and my commitment to proving that I can be the kind of employer and person who deserves your respect. The humility in his response was disarming. But Amara knew that words were easy while actions required courage and commitment over time. What kind of position are you talking about? She asked, allowing herself to consider the possibility despite her reservations. Assistant event coordinator to start, with rapid advancement opportunities based on Baking. Performance? Marcus replied. You would work directly with me on our highest profile events, learning every aspect of the business while contributing your own ideas and expertise. Salary? Amara asked, determined to approach this as a legitimate business discussion rather than charity disguised as opportunity. $45,000 to start, with performance bonuses and full benefits. Marcus replied without hesitation. That's $15,000 more than you were making at Willowbrook, with much better advancement potential. The numbers were impressive, representing not just increased income, but genuine career progression toward her long-term goals. Still, Amara hesitated to accept an offer that felt tainted by the circumstances of their meeting. I need time to think about this, she said finally. Today has been overwhelming, and I don't want to make a decision based on anger or desperation. Of course, Marcus agreed. Take all the time you need. In the meantime, I'm still going to call Harold and tell him the truth about the ring. You deserve to have your reputation cleared regardless of whether you decide to work for me. The commitment to action, even without guarantee of personal benefit, was encouraging, suggesting that his motivations might be genuine rather than purely self-serving. What will you tell Victoria? Why? Amara asked. She's going to want to know why you suddenly decided to come forward with the truth. I'll tell her exactly what I told you, Marcus replied. That I was a coward who made terrible decisions, and that I finally decided to do the right thing regardless of the personal consequences. She's not going to take that well, Amara observed. No, she's not, Marcus agreed grimly. But that's my problem to deal with, not yours. You suffered enough consequences for my poor choices. They finished their conversation with practical details about how he would contact Harold and what he would say about the true circumstances of the ring's disappearance. Marcus insisted on taking full responsibility for the deception and clearing Amara's name completely. As they prepared to leave the coffee shop, Marcus made one final request. I know you have no reason to give me another chance, but I hope you'll at least consider the job offer. Elite occasions could benefit enormously from someone with your skills and integrity. I'll consider it, Amara promised. Though she remained uncertain about whether working for him would be wise, given their complicated history. The drive home gave her time to process the evening's revelations and consider her options moving forward. Marcus's confession had answered her questions about the day's events, while raising new questions about her future career path. Her phone was buzzing with missed calls and text messages when she arrived at her apartment. Word of her situation had spread among Willowbrook's staff, and several colleagues had reached out to express support and outrage at her treatment. The most surprising message was from Elena Vasquez, the violinist who had witnessed the day's drama. I've been thinking about what happened today, and I want you to know that everyone who knows you believes in your innocence. Don't let one terrible day define your worth or your future. The support from her former colleagues was touching and helped counteract some of the damage done to her self-confidence by Victoria's public accusations. She realized that while one wealthy family had tried to destroy her reputation, Many others who knew her character continued to believe in her integrity. Around midnight, her phone rang with Harold Winters's number. She answered cautiously, unsure what her former boss might want to discuss at such a late hour. "Amara? I just got off the phone with Marcus Morrison." Harold's voice was heavy with exhaustion and what sounded like genuine remorse. "He told me everything about the ring. I owe you an enormous apology." "Yes, you do," Amara replied simply, not interested in making the conversation easier for him. "I want you back immediately," Harold continued. "Full pay, retroactive to today, plus a bonus for the distress you endured. I also want to make a formal announcement to the staff, clearing your name completely." "I appreciate the offer," Amara said carefully, "but I'm not sure I want to come back. Today showed me some things about Willowbrook's priorities that I need to think about." "I understand your hesitation," Harold replied. "I made a terrible decision based on fear rather than loyalty to someone who had earned my trust. If you're willing to return, I promise things will be different." "Different how?" Amara asked. "New policies about how we handle accusations against staff members," Harold explained. "No one will ever again be subjected to what you went through today. I should have demanded proof before taking any action against you." The promise of policy changes was encouraging, but Amara wondered whether Harold would maintain that commitment if faced with similar pressure from important clients in the future. "I'll think about it," she promised. "But right now, I need some time to process everything that's happened." "Of course," Harold agreed. "Just know that you have a job here whenever you're ready, with whatever terms you think are fair." After ending the call, Amara sat in her quiet apartment and contemplated the dramatic reversal of her fortunes. In less than 12 hours, she had gone from being unemployed and publicly disgraced to having multiple job offers and a cleared reputation. The vindication felt good, but it couldn't completely erase the memory of being accused and abandoned when she needed support most. The experience had taught her valuable lessons about the nature of loyalty and the importance of standing up for principles, even when it was costly to do so. Over the following week, Marcus proved true to his word by taking full responsibility for the deception publicly. He issued a statement to local media explaining that the missing ring had been the result of his own actions rather than any staff wrongdoing, and he personally apologized to each Willowbrook employee who had been affected by the false accusations. The public revelation created a scandal that dominated social media and local news for several days. Marcus's business reputation took a significant hit as clients questioned whether they could trust someone who had been willing to let innocent people suffer for his mistakes. Victoria Blake attempted damage control by claiming she had been deceived along with everyone else, but her cruel treatment of the staff during the crisis had been witnessed by too many people for her to escape criticism entirely. Several prominent families quietly canceled events they had planned to host, not wanting to be associated with someone who had shown such callous disregard for service workers. Amara watched these developments with mixed feelings. While she was glad to see justice served, she took no pleasure in the destruction of reputations and relationships. The whole experience had taught her that hurting others, even those who had wronged her, didn't provide the satisfaction she might have expected. Elite occasions suffered significant client losses as the scandal unfolded, but Marcus refused to let his employees suffer for his personal mistakes. He used his own savings to maintain full payroll and benefits, while working to rebuild the company's reputation through transparent business practices and exceptional service. After a week of consideration, Amara decided to accept Marcus's job offer, but with conditions. She insisted on a probationary period during which either party could end the employment relationship without penalty, and she demanded assurance that she would never be asked to compromise her integrity for business reasons. Marcus agreed to all her terms without negotiation, recognizing that rebuilding trust would require more than words and good intentions. He also implemented new company policies, ensuring that no employee would ever be sacrificed to protect client relationships or business interests. Amara's first assignment was planning a wedding for a young couple who had specifically requested to work with the woman who was falsely accused but maintained her dignity. The story of her experience had resonated with people who valued character over social status, and elite occasions began attracting clients who appreciated authenticity and integrity. Working directly with Marcus proved to be professionally rewarding despite their complicated history. His experience in luxury event planning, combined with her fresh perspective and attention to detail, created a dynamic partnership that elevated the quality of their events significantly. More importantly, Marcus demonstrated through consistent actions that his apology had been genuine. He never asked her to compromise her principles, always supported her decisions with clients, and created an environment where honesty was valued above diplomatic convenience. The first wedding they planned together was a celebration of love that contrasted sharply with the materialistic spectacle that Victoria Blake had envisioned. The couple valued authenticity over ostentation, choosing meaningful details over expensive displays. The result was an event that genuinely celebrated the union of two people, rather than showcasing wealth and social status. As autumn progressed into winter, Elite Occasions gradually rebuilt its reputation through exceptional service and ethical business practices. The company attracted clients who appreciated transparency and valued the well-being of service workers, creating a more sustainable and fulfilling business model. Amara's career flourished in ways she had never imagined possible during her years at Willowbrook. She discovered talents for vendor negotiation, timeline management, and crisis resolution that made her an invaluable member of the Elite Occasions team. More importantly, she found work that aligned with her values and allowed her to create beautiful experiences for people celebrating the most important moments of their lives. Marcus, meanwhile, used the crisis as an opportunity for genuine personal growth. The public humiliation and professional consequences of his deception forced him to confront patterns of avoidance and people-pleasing that had defined much of his adult life. He began seeing a therapist and reading extensively about ethical leadership and authentic living. Their working relationship evolved into a genuine friendship based on mutual respect and shared commitment to treating people with dignity, regardless of their social status. They never spoke directly about the romantic potential that occasionally seemed to hover at the edges of their interactions, both recognizing that their professional partnership was too valuable to risk complicating with personal entanglements. By spring, Elite Occasions had not only recovered from the scandal, but had emerged as a more respected and successful company than ever before. The crisis had forced Marcus to clarify his values and build a business that reflected authentic principles, rather than mere profit maximization. Amara was promoted to senior event coordinator with a salary increase that allowed her to move her grandmother into a better assisted living facility and provide additional support for her brother's education. More importantly, she had found work that challenged her intellectually while allowing her to make a positive difference in people's lives. The experience taught both of them that integrity was not just a moral luxury, but a practical necessity for building sustainable success. Companies and individuals who prioritized short-term advantage over long-term character ultimately discovered that reputation was both fragile and invaluable. On a warm Saturday in May, exactly 7 months after the wedding that never was, Amara stood in the gardens of a luxury resort overseeing the final preparations for Elite Occasions' most ambitious event to date. The 3-day celebration would host 500 guests from across the country, representing the kind of high-profile booking that validated the company's recovery and growth. Marcus approached with the timeline for the evening's rehearsal dinner, his confidence and leadership style now tempered by humility and genuine concern for his team's well-being. "Everything looks perfect," he observed, surveying the elegant setup that would serve as backdrop for the weekend's festivities. "It should," Amara replied with satisfaction. "We've had 6 months to plan every detail, and this couple actually cares more about creating beautiful memories than impressing their social circle." "Amazing what happens when clients share our values," Marcus observed with a smile that acknowledged how much both their professional and personal priorities had evolved. As the sun set over the resort's manicured grounds, Amara reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. The false accusation that had once threatened to destroy her career had instead become the catalyst for opportunities she could never have imagined while folding napkins at Willowbrook Country Club. The experience had taught her that character was revealed not in comfortable circumstances, but in moments of crisis when doing the right thing required courage and sacrifice. She had discovered reserves of strength and dignity she hadn't known she possessed, while also learning the importance of surrounding herself with people who shared her commitment to integrity. Marcus, meanwhile, had learned that true success required more than business acumen or social connections. It demanded the courage to align actions with values, even when the cost was high, and the wisdom to recognize that sustainable achievement was built on authenticity rather than expedience. As they watched the first guests arrive for the weekend celebration, both Amara and Marcus understood that their partnership had been forged in crisis, but strengthened by their shared commitment to creating something better than what they had found. The wedding that had never happened had ultimately given birth to a professional relationship and personal friendship that honored the best in both of them. The evening's rehearsal dinner proceeded flawlessly, filled with genuine laughter and heartfelt toasts that celebrated love in its most authentic form. As Amara coordinated with vendors and ensured every detail met their exacting standards, she felt the deep satisfaction that came from work that aligned with her values and utilized her talents fully. The false accusation that had once seemed like the end of her world had instead become the beginning of a career that exceeded her highest aspirations. Sometimes, she reflected, the worst moments in life were actually doorways to possibilities that would never have opened otherwise. Standing in the garden as stars appeared overhead, Amara Rodriguez smiled as she thought about the journey that had brought her from accused waitress to successful event coordinator. The ring that had never been missing had ultimately led her to discover treasures within herself she hadn't known existed, and for that unexpected gift, she found herself genuinely grateful. The story that had begun with false accusations and public humiliation had evolved into something far more meaningful, a testament to the power of integrity and the unexpected ways that crisis could become catalyst for transformation. As the weekend celebration continued around her, Amara knew with certainty that she had found not just a career, but a calling that would sustain and challenge her for years to come. In the end, the wedding ring that Marcus Morrison had been too afraid to lose had taught both of them that the most valuable things in life, integrity, authentic relationships, and meaningful work, could never be stolen or misplaced. They could only be chosen, defended, and cherished by people brave enough to prioritize character over convenience. The celebration continued late into the evening, filled with the kind of joy and authenticity that made all their hard work worthwhile. As Amara oversaw the final details of the evening's success, she understood that this was more than just a job or even a career. It was a life built on principles that had been tested by fire and emerged stronger than ever before. The ring was never the real story. The real story was about two people who discovered that doing the right thing, even when it was difficult and costly, was the only path to genuine success and lasting satisfaction. In learning that lesson, they had found not just professional partnership, but a friendship that would endure long after the last wedding cake had been served and the final toast had been made.